Hello and welcome. I'm your host Tyler here with
Nick.
and you're listening to Makeshift Meeples, where we won't teach you how to play board games, we just talk about them. Nick, what are we playing today?
This week on Makeshift Meeples, Sorcerer, a strategy card game.
Sorcerer is designed by Peter Schultz and published by White Wizard Games, with art by Jan Dranover, Alina Kuviakovic, Vasek Pinsik, Peter Schultz, and Pavel Siriusik.
In the grim world of Sorcerer, you control ancient beings of terrible power who constantly battle to test the strength of their lineage. Designed for 2 to 4 players, each round you will use sorcery to conjure minions, cast spells, and wield enchanted items to reach the game's goal of conquering 3 battlefields.
Okay, Nick. This week we got down and dirty with some evil sorcerer magic.
Dark wizards, one might say.
Oh my god, we felt the dark arts this week.
So we played sorcery, and we played the 3-player variant, right?
Yeah, we did, which is very different from the 2-player variant, which is also very different from the 4-player variant.
So it's almost like 4 different games.
I think that's pretty accurate. I mean, you use the same game mechanics,
Okay.
but just like if you were to play, another game that has multiple different,
Like Star Realms?
like Star Realms, yeah, like Star
But
Realms.
also by White Wizard.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, what I'm really trying to convey is that we didn't play the other 2 games, but I just feel like they would play very different.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So while we were playing, one of the things I thought about was, because the way the battlefields are arranged in a 3-player game is there's a battlefield essentially between each player.
Yeah.
So each player has 2 battlefields they can use. And that's very similar to the multiplayer Star Realms version, where between each player there's a buy row. Obviously, they're different parts of the game, but it had a very similar feel in that I'm only interacting with 2/3 of the board rather than the entire board.
Yeah, I do think that that's accurate, and I also think that when you're playing the game, the goal is to conquer the battlefields. Mm-hmm. So only having access to 2 of those battlefields as opposed to 3 of the battlefields like you would in a 2-player game makes the game just play very different. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I don't actually know how much different, because you're still doing the same thing. It's just you have extra players' resources to interact with.
Correct.
So from a metagame perspective, it may be more difficult.
So when we first sat down and you were explaining the game, one of my concerns was if I can't interact with that third battlefield, how do I balance things out? And I think as the game went on, and we all became better players at this game, you know, from turn 1 not having played it to turn 5 or 6, whatever, it became apparent that even though I don't have direct control over that other battlefield, because you 2 have to commit some sort of resources to it, mm-hmm. it freed me up to do things in my battlefields that were essentially against the 2 of you.
Yeah.
And if you were overcommitting to one battlefield or to the other battlefield, I basically had a free run at the one that was between us.
Yeah.
And vice versa, too.
Well, and there's game mechanics to incentivize you to play minions even if you weren't focused on that battlefield.
Yeah. Just to mitigate.
Yeah, and I think we're getting into some gameplay discussion now, but let's back it up a little bit and just talk about what you do in Sorcerer.
Sure.
Like I know we went through it a little bit in the intro, but in the game there's 4 phases. There's the ready phase.
Yep.
At the beginning of the game, but then there's 2 bulk phases. I would say bulk of the game phases, which are the action phase and the battle phase. And during the action phase, you spend energy to do, I think there are 5 actions. It was gain energy, draw 2 cards, play a card, move a minion. So if your minion was already out, you can move him to another battlefield. And was there another action?
I think so, but I don't remember off the top of my head. And
then during the battle phase, you activate your creatures, which just means you exhaust them. They're useless for the rest of the turn. But then you roll dice equal to the number of power that they have. And then players take turns manipulating those dice with these omen tokens that they've obtained earlier in the game. Mm-hmm. And that's really where the game takes place. Like, they frame this game as a card playing game. I'm
Yeah.
going to play the cards from my hand, but realistically, the whole game takes place during the battle phase where you use the cards that you played earlier.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So that was something as we played more, and this game was sort of, I don't want to say sold to me or billed to me as a card playing game.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like you can only say that in the same era as like Star Wars Destiny is a card playing game.
Yeah.
Because
but
those
you're really
dice
rolling
have such a huge impact on how the game actually comes out.
For sure.
You can, yes, improve your odds of having good results by playing specific cards. But the bottom line is, it's not like Magic the Gathering where you have a printed cost and a printed power and a printed toughness.
Yeah.
These things are variable. Like, you're getting a better opportunity to do more damage, but you're not guaranteed to do more damage because of the dice mechanic.
Yeah.
And the omens too. Like, that was something else. The omens allow you to manipulate the dice by re-rolling them, both on offense and defense, which I do like that ability, because you don't really have a defense. But I thought omens were going to be like super hard to come by. But in all honesty, like, I don't think any of us with all of our different deck types had any trouble making a decent number of omens like every turn.
Yeah, so omens are the tokens that let you reroll the dice. And most of the time, you would generate a large amount of omens from cards that you played.
Correct.
They normally had a symbol that gave you an omen, so it's like extra resource you
But
got.
everybody gets an omen at the beginning of the turn too. So
That's
you're guaranteed to have one.
But if I recall, just from playing, I always had maybe like 3 or 4 omens a turn. I think that was pretty average. But whenever players did a lot of things during the action phase that got them omens, they had upwards of, I would say, like 8. So it was like double the amount I had every turn.
I would say I pretty much had 5 to 7 on average.
Yeah. So I guess if I had to pick, I would say I almost always had 3 to 4.
Yeah.
So I don't know. But
your deck also had some of like the biggest, most ridiculous creatures in it too.
For sure.
So because you're rolling more dice, I think it's kind of fair that that's offset by not being able to re-roll some of those.
Yeah, you're right. I didn't feel like I was disadvantaged, even though you had a bunch of omens. And because when you re-roll a die, it could benefit whoever was the roller or be a negative. Because maybe you re-roll a crit, but it still lands on a crit. Or it lands on 2 hits.
Yeah.
Yeah, the dice in this game weren't necessarily... There weren't necessarily the best versions of a die on each side.
What do you mean by that?
Well, like if you got 2 hits, it was almost worse than a crit sometimes.
Yes. So again, that's the other thing in this game, because crits and hits are different.
Yeah.
With a critical hit, the attacker assigns that damage as they choose. With every other hit, whether it's a 1-hit face or a 2-hit face, the defender chooses how that damage is taken.
Yeah.
So I agree that like a crit and 2 hits aren't necessarily the same thing, because it depends on who's assigning that damage.
Yeah.
Because if I kill off one of your creatures in the first attack of the turn, then you don't have that creature when it gets to your turn to attack me back.
Like there's a mechanical benefit to wanting a double hit or a crit.
Yeah.
And crits are always the best when there's no enemies on the board.
Because then they're a double hit.
Yeah, so realistically you can kill all the enemies. You just want to roll crits all the time.
Yep.
But at the same time, there was points of the game where you re-rolled the double hit and not my crit.
Yes.
So.
But and that was again because I had defenders, and I knew that my guys were going to die anyway. Either you were going to kill them or I was going to kill them.
Yeah.
And there was going to be extra damage on the board or the location then as well. It was just a matter of how it was distributed.
Yeah.
And that was something else. Like this game, don't get too attached to any of your characters.
Yeah.
Like they're going to die on the board.
I was surprised at how long some of mine lasted for. When I was looking through, I had the demon deck. I think it was the Keepers of the Flame.
Well, let's talk about that real quick, because that was something that was really interesting about this game too, and something that I thought I really liked about it was unlike it being, it's not a deck builder, it's more of a deck player. And you brought up Smash Up when we were playing, just because, and it's not like Smash Up other than at the beginning of the game, you essentially select character. What what was the second part? A
You-
lineage?
You select a character, a lineage, and then a location. Well, yeah.
So that makes up your deck, though. Like, those 3 parts of it become your 40 card deck that you play.
So when you make those selections, you get a card that sits next to your board.
Yep.
It also has actions on it, but you also get a deck that's associated with the top card that
Right.
you got. And they're all different. They play completely differently too.
Oh, very much so.
But some of them synergize better with others.
So I thought about that more after we played, because we talked about synergies between like different lineages and different characters and different locations. And I had 2 that seemed like they should work really, really well together, because I had like the zombie lord guy and a location, I believe it was the location, that kind of let you like bring stuff back from the graveyard essentially.
Mm-hmm.
But thinking about it more, like those cards, the main card and its ability really synergizes just with that deck.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to get a lot of like cross synergies,
Yeah.
other than like my deck. It was okay for me to have stuff die, throw it in the graveyard, because I can probably bring it back either because it's a zombie and I can recast it.
Yeah.
Or I had another card that let me essentially play a card from my hand and then possibly play another card from the graveyard.
Well, I think the synergies come with the top cards.
Yes.
Or the I call them action cards, I think, because they're not just action cards by definition, but they give you additional actions that you can do. And the one that I had let me, whenever I cast specifically a demon, I could put 2 flame counters on something.
Right.
And so the deck that came with, that card came with,
Had a bunch of
Had a
demons
bunch of
in it.
demons.
Yeah.
But if I had the character that also did things with demons, then maybe that would have added.
Was there a
little bit.
character that did stuff with demons?
It looked like there was. I don't think we got to play that character.
Okay.
And maybe I'm completely wrong. I didn't look through the decks. I'm just guessing.
Because that was something else I noticed. Like, one of my decks had zombies in it.
Mm-hmm.
The other deck had fiends, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one had demons.
Okay.
So, like, all 3 of them had demons and maybe something else. But, like, they all had different creatures in it.
Yeah.
So there wasn't that, like, you get the zombie lord with the zombies for a lineage and a zombie location, and it's just like, zombies,
and maybe,
you know?
Maybe that is how the game is. If we played multiple games over multiple sessions, I don't think it would necessarily be... I don't think we'd find too many broken things in the game.
Yeah, I think they did a really, really good job of balancing this out.
Yeah. Well, especially from the perspective of just card balance in games.
Mm-hmm.
When you played a card, I remember, wow, that card was good.
Yeah.
Like, I wish I had that card on my deck. But at the same time, I don't know if it was broken. Because if I've used with a frame of reference of other games, I just think that's unfair. And I actually have watched a couple of videos where people say this game feels like X.
Yeah.
Or it feels like a combination of these 2 games. But I think there's so many mechanics in this game that feel like you're playing another game that it's just unfair to base a balancing restriction or judgment based on one game.
Yeah.
Like, you can't just compare this to Magic. You can't just compare this to Game of Thrones card game. You can't compare it to Smash Up. I mean, they just play differently. The goals are different.
Oh, yeah, very much so.
But I think this team does a great job of taking aspects of other games and combining them.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the most original game, but it does feel like a different game from anything that I've played, even though I can see aspects of multiple board games in it.
So, yeah, I completely agree. And as somebody that has played other games where it just feels like they took mechanics from here, mechanics from here, mechanics from here, and threw them into a box, this one did it extremely well. And that seems to be more the exception than the rule. I mean, whenever you're grabbing different mechanics from all over the place, it's very easy to have one of those mechanics overshadow the rest of the mechanics in the game. And I think they did a really good job of making sure all of those things kind of balanced out the right way.
Sure.
Because it's... I'm sure any of us that have played games for any period of time have played those games where you're like, well... Phase 1 of this game is like X, Phase 2 of this game is like Y, and Phase 3 is like Z. But it's really all about Y. The first and the last phase don't really matter that much. They're just sort of technically there.
Yeah, I guess you could say the same with the end of round phase and the beginning of the turn phase. Like they probably could have put that in one, but I don't know. It felt like it played well. And the only time we ever had effects that happened at the end of turn were, I think, on my cards. So I guess that maybe felt a little superfluous, but I think you need that step.
Well, I think it was also important to differentiate those because then you had stuff that triggered at end of round, so you need that phase to exist so that the timing of it doesn't get confused with anything that's happening in like refresh.
Yeah, I do agree. So I didn't feel like the phases were overbearing or difficult to understand. One thing I did want to mention was the board in this game, the player board, was a very good aid. I think we mentioned that in the last game, that we didn't have a very good player aid. But this one, it had a spot for your deck, it had a spot for your discard pile, it had a spot for your energy, your actions, and it also had a spot for telling you what you can do on each phase of the game, not just the action phase, not just the battle phase. And it was easy to read.
It was. And they were really well made, too, and they looked beautiful. And that was something else that you and I kind of talked about off screen, was just the overall aesthetics of this game. The art's fantastic. It's interesting because I had the same thought that you did when we were talking about it, where like it clearly has a darker art theme to it, but it's not like a disgusting darker.
No, it's not.
It's not a gruesome darker. Like
it's like mysterious.
It's classy dark.
Yeah, it's like mysterious and dangerous.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think they even mentioned that the characters that we play are all evil.
Yes.
So they very specifically say that. And
you are not playing good wizards here, Harry.
Yeah, oh gosh. We're all Professor Quirrell. Is that his name?
Sure, why not?
Yeah. Or Lord Voldemort. Okay. I don't know if we were two-faced men, though.
Oh my gosh.
No?
Let's move along.
Okay. That's a rabbit hole. Well, I did also like the battlefield.
So yeah, that was we were talking about the battlefield. The other thing you didn't mention is that it flips over and there's like essentially a right-handed and a left-handed version of it.
Oh, of the player board?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so the battlefields flip over too. So So in a two-player game, once you conquer it, you just flip it over, and then nothing else can be done there, which is kind of cool. There's actually art on the back that looks like a destroyed version of the art on the front. It's not just a blank back.
And that's in the two-player version, which we didn't play. In the three-player version, it just like resets the board, and you go again. Yeah,
you destroy all the minions, you reset the points, and then technically, whatever battle was being there is done. But but the winning player gets a point.
Right.
And we played the 3 points.
So that was one mechanic of this game that I really liked as well, where once a battlefield is won, every minion that is at that location just goes away.
It needed to be there. I guarantee they tested this game and they didn't have that in, and it just felt like the game's probably ended too quickly, because you could just put a bunch of power on one board and then destroy
move it to another one, destroy it again, move it back, destroy another one. Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, and you had a guy that was like a 7/6, which I think the biggest creature I played was like 5 power with 4 toughness.
So I remember like every turn I was fighting your characters, it felt like you had a zombie lord that pumped your guys, so you were rolling like 12 or 15 dice a turn, and I was always rolling maybe like 8, but my 8 dice were spread amongst fewer creatures.
Yeah, you had 2 creatures out, I had 4.
Yeah.
To get to that same dice count.
Yeah. Well, and I also had my big creatures survive multiple battles.
Yeah.
So I would fight one battle, then move them over to another place, and then I would put more guys at the place that I had previously fought at, and then
they finish that up.
Yeah, they would win that one. And my big guys were pretty powerful. They just drew me more cards. Like if I had to compare the effects to Magic, they felt like very powerful effects. But like I said, I don't think it's fair to compare, because you had cards in your deck that I would just think are ridiculously overpowered for some other games, but they didn't feel overpowered for this game.
Well, my deck with the zombies had the interesting mechanic that like you can just kind of bring zombies back, which is extremely thematic and correct in the way it worked.
Yeah.
Because zombies come back. That's sort of how zombies work.
Yeah, and they were free, right?
So some were free, some you had to pay a cost for. Like the very basic ones, which I think only had like 1 toughness and like 3 dice, you could bring those ones back as an action without paying anything, which was pretty cool because then I could just plop a zombie lord out there and throw like 2 of those guys and another dude out there. All of a sudden, I've got a lot of power on the board.
Yeah, you could definitely make things appear quickly if you didn't have anything in your hand.
Right.
Just use your graveyard.
Now, that being said, there was some other larger zombies that you still had to pay the cost for, but you could bring them back. But, you know, I think the biggest zombie I had was like 4 dice and 3 toughness that cost me 4 energy, mana, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And I don't know if he was... He wasn't nearly as efficient as the 3 dice, 1 toughness zombies that I can just bring back for an action. Especially if I could pair him with a lord. Like, that's where the balancing seemed about right.
I actually really enjoy just listening to you talk about how your deck played, because my deck didn't play that way at all.
I was completely different.
I was trying to manipulate the math on how I could get flame counters on guys so that I could do damage to them. Because flame counters didn't do damage until the end step, but sometimes I needed to kill things now.
Right.
And so there were cards that said you could put flame counters on or do damage equal to the number of flame counters that were already on. But I had to use I only had 6 actions a turn, and only a specific amount of mana, so I had to figure out how to like best to get those actions in my cards and the amount of mana I had to line up with being able to kill things that were really scary, but still being able to do something on the board.
So that was something else that came up while we were playing, is there weren't any, like, air quotes, instant speed things that you could do like during combat, which I really liked, because you had your action phase where everybody's doing stuff to manipulate the state of the board. But then once we go to combat, you're simply working with what's on the board.
Yeah.
You're working with what's on the board and your omens, and that is it. So from there, that's where you got to figure it out.
I partially agree with you. I have a mixed feeling about instant speed interaction, because I think it adds a lot of complexity to the game, but it also adds a large variable for balancing the game.
Oh, yeah.
Because, like in Magic, a 1-mana spell that kills something at instant speed is much better than a 1-mana spell that kills something at sorcery speed. Right? But then there's multiple balancing factors to that. But in this game, it didn't feel like I was gonna get gotcha'd by like doing something and then you responding to me. And I think in a game like this, where it's not supposed to be competitive, at least I felt like it wasn't supposed to be competitive. It's a multiplayer game. I felt like it's very important for all the players to feel good about the game. And one of the easiest ways to feel bad is to feel like you did something wrong because they got you with an instant speed spell.
For sure.
But at the same time, if this was supposed to be a more competitive game, I think maybe they could add something there. And now, speaking of adding things to this game, actually, did you want to say something, Nick?
No, cool.
Okay. But speaking of adding something to this game, there are expansions.
Yep.
And we didn't get to see any of those. We just had the base game.
Right.
But maybe they did get added later. Maybe there's a lot of cool mechanics.
I think they were in like the original Kickstarter or something, and I believe they're coming out separately.
Cool.
But the thing I did like about the expansions, now that you bring it up, is the fact that the base box has room for those expansions to just go in it.
Yeah.
So you're not into I've got a cool game, I want an expansion, okay, that's another box. I want another expansion, okay, that's another box. It, at least for a decent amount of time, you can just put those expansions in the base box.
I could probably talk about the positives and negatives to the box.
Yeah, you had a lot of issues with this box, but I don't.
My biggest problem with this box is that the inserts that divide the card types, so the lineage, the training ground, and the character, they're just too small to fit there. But I think they're too tall. They're too tall and too wide. But I think they have to be that way, or else they wouldn't fit there.
Well, I think they're designed to work with sleeved cards too.
I wish they would have just had like slots in there instead of like those nice dividers.
Kind of like a Dominion box, how it's just got all the little slots. I would agree with you on that. I think that would have worked better, but I think it works anyway.
Yeah. I did want to mention something else that I found very interesting about this game, and that was the way the game was sold to me, right? Like when I looked at the box, I thought it was going to be a game about shuffling up these different sorcerer decks, but they don't really mention that a lot of the game happens when you roll dice. How'd you feel about that?
I agree with you in that it was sort of billed as a card game. But again, like I said, I think it's a card game in as much as Star Wars Destiny is a card game.
Okay.
The cards improve your opportunities to do well, but there's still a huge other component to it that is not really in the billing, which I think it should be. I don't think it's a bad part. I think it's a fantastic part of this game, but it's just not what I kind of walked into it expecting.
Yeah. So when I first bought the game, I thought it was going to be about shuffling up these sorcerer decks.
Yep.
And then playing those cards to do something,
Right.
Fight over these battlefields. But when I watched the videos and when I read the rules, they're like, oh, yeah, you roll these dice and you manipulate the dice. And I traditionally don't like dice rolling games.
Right.
Especially ones where you just try to re-roll the dice and manipulate them. I think it's fun to manipulate the dice when you know what the result is going to be, but not when it's just random.
Sure.
But this game felt much better.
Yeah.
My expectations were low when I read the rules, but after playing the game, I would say I had much more fun with it than I thought.
All right. Yeah, I in general enjoy dice rolling games just because I tend to prefer games where there's a little bit of strategy and a little bit of randomness, just because I think even newer players can at least enjoy some of that randomness when you come in, you have a good roll and it's like, I did a mountain of damage.
Yeah, so after playing this game, I can remember multiple times where there was very, very big highs.
Oh, yeah.
Whether it was like for the player that won or for the player that lost, like everybody was interested and excited to see how the die rolls went. And you spin that omen token, they roll the die, and then you're like, oh, and then the other person like spins the omen token, they roll the die, and then it's like the exact thing they needed.
Oh, yeah.
There are mountains of highs in this game.
Yeah.
And I didn't really see any bad lows.
So I think this was pretty telling. The folks that were playing at the table next to us, we were playing at board game night, so I was kind of surprised because I felt like they took off. Like they played one game and left. And then I looked at the clock and was like, oh, no. We've been playing for like 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
Okay. Which to me is a good sign that like we were all enjoying it and having a good time, just didn't realize how long we'd actually been playing.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Oh man, it says it's an hour game. It took us maybe like 2.5, 3 hours, I think.
Which obviously the first playthrough, like it's going to take longer.
For sure.
I think that if we played again, we could probably play it in about an hour and a half.
I think that the different game types probably have different average game lengths too.
I think a 2-player game could probably be done in an hour. I think 3 players, you got to add a little more time in there.
Yeah, there's more for sure. There's more complexity.
Oh yeah.
Okay, well, Nick, how many? It's on to the rating
Yeah.
section of this podcast. But how many Sorcerer's Apprentices would you give it?
This is your rating in Sorcerer's Apprentices.
Yeah. Well, if I get to pick, I would do Nick Cage, specifically Nick Cage, Sorcerer's Apprentice, not the other guy, not the apprentice. We need the actual sorcerer.
You need the actual sorcerer because that's the name of the game.
It is.
What do you give it?
I think that it would be very accurate to give this about an 8.
Okay.
And maybe it gets better over time, so maybe that increases. I think 8's fair, though.
So, having only played the 3-player, I watched a little bit of how to play the 2-player, and I think that might be a better version of it. Not to say 3-player's bad, but I would give it 9 Dark Wizards this
9
week.
Dark Wizards?
I really enjoyed this game. I highly recommend
You're giving it 9 Voldemorts?
Nah. Gosh. Harry Potter references aside, yes.
All right, Nick. Well, thanks for playing with me. I had a great time this week.
Yeah, it was a good one, and I look forward to next week.
Yeah. See ya. Thank you for listening to Makeshift Meeples.
You can see more about our upcoming shows on our website, makeshiftmeeples.com, as well as offer us feedback or contact us about games you would like to see on the show.
If you enjoyed the episode, there are a number of ways you can help us keep this thing going.
Share this episode with a friend.
Hit that subscribe button so that you're notified of future episodes.
Like and follow us on social media.
And you can support us on the Patreon and Anchor app.